welcome everybody to our event today. If you're not a member of Federalist Society, we encourage you to join. I've been working with the attorneys chapter. I see we have a lot of attorneys. We're looking to get the attorneys chapter stood up and going strong again. The national office has been working with some local counsel, and hopefully we'll have that up and going soon. You can follow us on social media. We do live tweet and broadcast almost all of our presentations. Also, I've been asked if there are anyone else that are interested in becoming an officer of Federalist Society. Please forward your information to Micah Goebel, our chapter president. Great opportunity. I've been an officer for my entire time in law school and had lots of great opportunities because of it. Today we have Professor Josh Blackman from South Texas College of Law. He's going to be speaking on First Amendment, Second Amendment, and 3D printed guns. Professor Blackman is an associate professor of law at the South Texas College of Law who specializes in constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court, and the intersection of law and technology. He's the author of the critically acclaimed Unprecedented, The Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. Professor Blackman was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. He has testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action on immigration. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He is the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league, and blogs at joshblackman.com. Professor Blackman leads the cutting edge of legal analytics as director of judicial research at Lex Predict. He is the author of over 24 law review articles, and his commentary has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, LA Times, and other national publications. So without further ado, please help me welcome Professor Josh Blackman.
Thank you, Lyle. All right, welcome everyone. I'm very grateful to the Nebraska Federal Society for hosting me. This is my second year here, and I'm very grateful to be back. Also to Lyle and his friends in the chapter, they do a great job. So we have a treat today. Not just one constitutional right, but two constitutional rights. How the First and Second Amendment protect the right to have and print 3D guns. And this is actually a very relevant and salient topic, not just for academic discourse, but it's a real case. I'm in fact counsel to Cody Wilson, who actually was a student at UT Austin Law School, who created 3D guns. And we are currently defending Cody's rights in federal court, and we are on appeal to the Fifth Circuit. So this is not just an academic question, this is indeed a real life. So first of all, 3D printing, okay? Has anyone ever actually used a 3D printer? Wow, one. What have you made? Okay, what was it? It was what? Letter I, okay. So 3D printing is a way of effectively designing something on a computer and making it real. You can start with something as simple or as complicated as a house or a car. And by designing these items in 3 dimensions on the computer, you're actually able to create a real live object. So I'll give you a brief tutorial on how 3D printing works. The same way I would describe an object using words or measurements to build something, you can use code on the computer. So here's a very simple example. If you remember your high school geometry, right? The volume of a cylinder, you need to know the height, how tall it is, and you need to know the radius, the width of the object. So if I told you I wanted a cylinder with a height of 20 and a radius of 5, you would know exactly what to draw for me. And 3D printing works in the exact same fashion. Measurements and dimensions in plain words, in plain English that we would use, you can create these objects. Or for a sphere with a radius of 10, you can figure out the volume, right? Now, what can you create? You can create simple little plastic tchotchkes or whatever toy that you may have created. You can create more extensive stuff using what's called a 3D printer. And a 3D printer works very much like making a candle. Has anyone ever made a candle, right? What do? You take a wick, and then you dip it in wax, you pull it out. You dip it in wax, you pull it out, And every time you keep dipping it, the candle gets thicker and thicker at the base. 3D printing works in the exact same fashion. But instead of actually dipping something, what actually happens is you spray. So this is a very basic diagram of a 3D printer that sprays a very thin layer of plastic, a couple micrometers thick. It's very thin. And by layering one layer on top of the next, you can actually create a fully realistic object. And here's a different diagram which shows it from a different perspective. So I want to actually demonstrate how 3D printing works by showing you a 3D printer creating something. This will be printing an object that I'm sure all of you know what it is. Okay, you will figure it out very quickly. So here is photograph number 1. You can see that puts down this sort of honeycomb lattice base. And this is so the object is very strong. So you have 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers. When you see what it is, call it out. 4 layers. Anyone see it yet? 5 layers. What? Say it. Okay, brain, okay. 6 layers. Anyone see it yet? 7 layers. Oh, come on, Nebraska, kill me. What? You're real close. 8 layers. Yoda. Who said it? Yoda. Okay. 9 layers. Now everyone sees it, right? It's Yoda from Star Wars, The Force is with you, right? This, by layering one on top of another in a matter of minutes, you can create a fully detailed and complicated object, such as Yoda. Whereas in the past, had you made this out of rubber or clay or stone, we've taken significant skill in actually chiseling it out. And if you wrap off the head is done, and you have this entire 3D model. This only takes a few minutes to print. This is not a very intensive object, and it's made out of plastic, and it probably costs a few dollars to make. Okay? So this is the basic process by which 3D printing is able to create objects. And you can get pretty creative with the items you can create. So, because what do you think the first object that people would want to print is?
Guns.
Guns, of course, because God bless America. Yes, we are in America. I'm in red country, Nebraska. Want to give this talk in Brooklyn? They're like, organs, you know, skin, wheelchairs. No. Guns. This is what we're talking about. Perspective, I suppose. So one of the first objects people decided they wanted to create with 3D printers were firearms. Enter the Liberator. This was the aptly named gun to liberate us from gun laws, as it were. Oh, by the way, if there are any persons in this room who are not U.S. citizens, I am not allowed to show you this photo. I'm going to do it anyway. I'll explain why later. Okay? This is actually the blueprint for the barrel of the Liberator. It was designed by this guy. His name is Cody Wilson. Cody was a law student at the University of Texas at Austin. And during his first year in law school, he didn't like going to class that much, but he did enjoy designing 3D guns. Cody is a self-avowed anarchist. He loves Bastiat, among others, and he has a very pro-Second Amendment view, shall we say. And Cody, who never finished law school, I think he dropped out after his first year or shortly thereafter. I'm not quite sure exactly when he finished. But he started to design various elements of firearms with a 3D printer. So one of the first things he designed was this. And if any of you know guns, you know what this is? Oh, God bless Nebraska. This in Brooklyn, no one knew what it was last week. This is an AR-15 lower. What is an AR-15 lower, sir?
It's the only part of the AR-15 that actually has a serial number, thus the only regulated.
It's not the part to make the guns work. It's the part you don't need the government's permission for. Yes. So this is actually the guts of an AR-15. This is what makes the gun work. And as the gentleman said correctly, This is the only part you need a serial number for. This is the part that the government has an interest in. Now, little known fact, can you make your own AR-15 lowers?
You can.
Yes, you
for
can.
Personal use only.
Yes, you can. So it's perfectly legal to manufacture your own AR-15 lowers so long as they're for personal consumption. So Cody designed the blueprints for an AR-15 lower receiver, and he put them online. And he was actually able to test it in an AR-15, and it held up through thousands of rounds. So this was the guts of the gun Cody designed. The next item that Cody designed is this little white magazine. Okay, this is what's called an AR-15 magazine, holds about 30 rounds. He nicknamed it the Cuomo, after the governor of New York, Cuomo, who tried to ban these magazines. Cody has a sense of humor. The greatest, my favorite thing he designed was called the Dirty Diane, which is a sort of a silencer named after Dianne Feinstein. Use that for what you will. I'll show you the Dirty Diane later. So Cody designed this magazine, and again, it handled thousands of rounds. These were, again, illegal in New York and in some other states, but in most states, these are perfectly legal to purchase. But Cody really made international headlines with this invention. This is the Liberator. What the heck is that? Like a bunch of little plastic squiggles, right? A bunch of little loops on the, what the heck is that? These parts, 16 or 17 different parts, can be printed entirely from a 3D printer and assembled to create a fully functional pistol. This is not, part of the gun. This is not a magazine. This is the entire gun. So with the exception of this, which is a little steel nail, that's used as a firing pin. And this, it's a little, I can't remember, what caliber. It's a very low caliber. Was it, Lyle?
22.
I think it's even lower than a 22. It's really small. But it's a very small caliber, not quite a BB, but a little bit bigger than that. But it's a low caliber projectile. Other than these two parts, the entirety of the gun is actually manufactured. In case you're trying to figure out, this is the actual handle, this is the barrel, and these little things are the springs that when you pull it back, they snap and trigger the firing pin. And this is the actual barrel of the gun right there, where the projectile comes out of. So Cody put on the internet these files. And these files, if you follow instructions, can be used to make a 3D printed gun. Now, this is not something that you press a gun, beep, 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 and press a button and the gun pops out. It's actually very complicated to make this. Just to give you an indication, the barrel, the tip of the gun, in order to withstand the combustion of the round, the bullet, it needs to be treated in an acetone and vinegar bath to build up the right amount of resistance to handle the heat. Because when you pull that trigger, there's a lot of heat. Otherwise, it goes boom. And it took Cody significant time to figure out the right way of manufacturing these parts so they don't blow up in his hand. Indeed, the first few times he tested it, he put a string on the trigger and he stood very far back and yanked it, lest it blow up in his hands. But ultimately, Cody was able to test it to the point where he was confident enough to shoot it with his own two hands. And this works. Now, number one rule, never point the gun at someone. Cody missed that one there, but it makes for an impressive photograph. So is there a problem here? Okay. Did Cody do anything illegal? Did Cody break any laws? And again, people have this warped image of 3D guns that, they hit Control P, they press print, and out comes a fully functional pistol. This is not reality. In fact, Cody tells us to actually make a Liberator, it takes about 24 hours. You need to have extensive knowledge how to work with these 3D printers, how to treat the materials, how to work with the plastics. I've never tried. I don't think I could do it if I wanted to. I'm not that talented. But this is not, click print. Okay. But is this legal? Can you make your own guns? So the short answer is yeah. So who here knows what a zip gun is? Yeah. What's a zip gun, sir?
It's like a pipe with a ring of prison.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. A zip gun is a gun you manufacture yourself. Okay. For example, this is a gun. It's made out of a garden hose and a soldering iron. Okay, so you take a soldering iron, you weld on the tip of the hose, a garden hose, you put a little spring there, and now you have a gun. This is another type of a zip gun. Those little keychain flashlights you get, little flashlights put in your keychain. If you hollow out the inside and you replace it with a little spring, you can make a gun. All right? The point I'm trying to convey is that Cody Wilson did not invent homemade guns. People have been making guns at home for a very, very, very long time. And I want to show you a demonstration. Now, do not try this at home. These guys are absolute morons. And you'll see why I'm being so mean to them in a moment, right? This is not a safe place in this room, right? These guys are idiots, and they're just being very stupid. So they are attempting, as the gentleman said, to make a rifle out of a piece of rubber tubing and a metal pipe. This is all you need to make a gun. Lyle's wincing. It's going to get worse. So on the tip of this metal pipe is a little dimple, right? A little point. They're going to use this as a firing pin. How does a bullet work? In the back of a bullet or a cartridge, there's gunpowder. If you pierce it hard enough, it creates a spark, goes boom, and it discharges a bullet which flies through the air and strikes the target. So what they're going to do is use the tip of the projectile. Or apologies, you can't see what I'm pointing to in the wings. Your fault for sitting there. Just kidding. Plenty of room in front. So they're going to try and pierce the back of the cartridge and effectively send the shotgun shell going forward. So what do these guys do? They load the shotgun shell into the pipe, and they're going to jam it in there. Now, I want you to pay very close attention. It's like, where's Waltlow, right? What sticks out in this photograph? Anyone see it? What? Okay, his thumb is there. Right, his thumb is kind of right near the barrel. What else sticks out about the room they're in? Anyone sees it? Okay, they're shooting into a wall. What do you see? It's yellow. Wires. There's an electric outlet right there with a cable stretching down. There's another one going up there. There's either 3 or 4 holes in that box also. They've done this before. Okay, again, do not try this at home. The next shot makes it even more clear. There's a fan plugged in, and they're basically shooting right into a bunch of electrical cables. These guys are morons. I told you, I was not trying to be mean. They are. So what happens? They're going to jam it. They're going to take the metal pipe and go boom, right? They're going to boom. Ready? Boom. These idiots just made a gun, right? And if you actually pay attention, there's actually a new hole that emerges on this box. Fortunately, they didn't hit either of these 4 cables stretching out right behind it. I can't even fathom how stupid these people are. Again, this video's on YouTube. There's some salty language in it, which I don't play the video, but take my word for it, these guys are morons. And look at, they're so proud. They take the shotgun shell out. It's smoking, right? And they're very proud of themselves. Here you can see that the shotgun shell is spent. Now, the question is, did these guys break the law? Did they do anything illegal? So there may be local ordinances saying that you can't discharge a firearm inside, or that you can't discharge a firearm in city limits, or various things like this. But under federal law, is it illegal to make your own gun? No. So according to our good friends at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, our favorite convenience store, the short answer is no. You can make your own firearms at home. Now, if you sell them in commerce, that is a different story. But for your own personal consumption, yes, you can make your own gun. You can make your own gun out of a soldering iron and a garden hose. You can make your own gun out of a little flashlight, or you can make a gun out of a piece of rubber tubing and piping. I can go to Home Depot now for $20 and buy all the materials that are necessary in order to make that sort of a gun. Right? So now what happens, right? If this is all legal, then how could it be that the State Department told Cody Wilson, my client, that he needs to delete from the internet the files that could be used to make the gun? Now, this is getting into the case a little bit. I'll come back to it later. But the government basically argued that the 3D the 3D printed files, just the files themselves, that these are the functional equivalent of a weapon. That putting files on the internet is just the same as exporting a gun to Syria. I'm not exaggerating. The government's argument is that files, data, are the functional equivalent of guns. All right. So what's the problem here, right? There are two major problems. They also happen to be the first two amendments to the United States Constitution. The First and the Second Amendment. So in my remaining time, I'd like to explain why I think bans on 3D guns run afoul of not only free speech, but the right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment. So we start, of course, with the First Amendment. And it's black letter law that when the government makes a classification on speech on the basis of its content, strict scrutiny is afforded. And for the most part, when a law is judged under a theory of strict scrutiny, the government will lose. If you look at a case like Brown versus EMA, United States versus Stevens, United States versus Alvarez, the Roberts Court has been very strong on protection of free speech, even for speech that is quite unsavory. You have the funeral protesting case, you have the Crush Films case, where people are crushing little kitties and stuff, you know? And then you have the case from Brown versus EMA. Violent video games are protected speech. Wait a minute, how can a video game be speech? Well, speech is not limited to books and books and writings and poems. It also includes electronic arts, electronic media. Okay? But wait a minute, Josh. We're not talking here about, a violent video game. We're not talking here about, protesting outside of a funeral. We're talking about files that can be used to harm someone, right? If these files are printed, they can be used as a gun. And that gun can then be used to shoot someone, and then it can do something very dangerous, right? Shouldn't the government be able to regulate the so-called secondary effects of these 3D guns? Even if the guns themselves even if the files themselves are protected, the consequences of these guns ought not to be. So to give you an easy example of this, I turned to a book called The Anarchist Cookbook. Does anyone ever have a copy of this book? Why am I not surprised? What? Don't look at me. What's The Anarchist Cookbook?
It's the book that can give you the blueprints to make anything to cause all sorts of mischief.
Yeah. So this is like, the Bill Ayers Weather Underground Bible, okay? This is a book that's used to cause mischief. How to make bombs, how to make explosives, how to conduct various operations. I mean, there's some pretty dangerous stuff in here. If you use the advice in this book, you can harm people, you can kill people. For years, governments have attempted to keep this book off the shelf. This was before the internet where you could just download everything. But the courts consistently held that you can't ban a book merely because it can be used to facilitate crime, right? Lots of speech can be used to facilitate a crime. For example, a gunsmithing book teaching how to make a gun can be used to facilitate a crime. A magazine with instructions how to build a bomb can be used to facilitate crime. The mere fact that the speech has this effect is not enough. Also, a recent decision last year by the Supreme Court called Reed versus Town of Gilbert. This is a very significant case. And the case had this facts. The city said, if you want to have a sign for a political event, you can have a really big sign. But if you want to put signs for a church meeting, you have a little sign. And the court said this law is insane. Why should the government distinguish? One type of sign gets a big sign, you have to keep it up there, and the church gets this little sign that's removed right away. But one of the aspects of this decision was how they rejected the state's interest in eliminating clutter. So usually, if the state wants to regulate speech, they say, wait a minute, we're not regulating the speech, we're regulating the consequences of that speech. For example, the state can't ban adult strip clubs. They can't ban them. But they can say, you know what? We're going to make sure they're regulated out in the hinterlands because of the secondary effects such as drugs and crime and gangs usually associate with strip clubs. So in this case, Did the Supreme Court, were they concerned with the secondary effects of signs about this clutter and visual, visual aesthetic problems? No, didn't even mention it. So this case is actually very good for us because it says the mere fact that speech can be used in a destructive manner for various consequences, that doesn't matter. Now, what's interesting in our case is that the government's actually said in their briefs that they can satisfy strict scrutiny. They've actually said that their interest in national security is so compelling that they can overcome the burdens of strict scrutiny. So the idea of imposing a prior restraint on speech, which the government basically concedes in limited extent, is justified. So the case we have to think about here is one called the Pentagon Papers case, which is a case I'm sure you've all studied in constitutional law. And the facts of the case were like this. The New York Times and other newspapers acquired the Pentagon Papers. These were papers discussing the Vietnam War. And they disclosed troop movements and various aspects of the war that made the Pentagon look actually pretty bad. So what happened? The Pentagon went to federal court and they started an injunction to stop the New York Times from publishing this article. Can you imagine? To stop a newspaper from publishing an article. The Supreme Court, in a very fragmented decision, there was no clear majority, but a majority of the court said that no, we cannot allow a prior restraint on the basis of content. But what about national security? What about if this in fact harms national security? So one of the opinions, I think it was by Justice Stewart, I might be blanking on which one, but I think it was Justice Stewart, effectively said if the government wants to show that national security is a reason why you censor speech, they got to be specific. They have to give a specific, concrete example of why this prior restraint is justified. What is the government's specific example of why prior restraint is justified here? I kid you not. They actually wrote in their brief that a foreign mercenary army can 3D print these little stupid plastic pistols and assassinate a world leader. The government actually speculated that these foreign mercenaries or terrorists can print these little plastic guns and use this to assassinate a world leader, as if that's the only way in the world they can get a gun. Okay. So under the standards of the Pentagon Papers case, they don't even come close to the sort of particularity necessary to justify this prior restraint. The government submits they can satisfy strict scrutiny. I humbly submit they cannot. So the next element to talk about is, wait a minute, Josh. We're not talking here about, a newspaper article about troop movements or a video game or anything else. We're talking about code. Code. Remember I showed you that little line of code, how the cylinder with the height of this and the radius of this, remember this? Is this speech, right? Are zeros and ones, when we write in various programming languages, is this speech that's protected by the First Amendment? So for this, I turn to a recent case called Sorrell v. IMS Health. This was a decision from 2011, which involved First Amendment protections of various amounts of information used by medical companies. And the court held in fairly broad language that, quote, the creation and dissemination of information are speech. The court identified two different aspects to speech. It was the creation and also the sharing, the dissemination of information. This is significant for our purposes because an issue in this case is that Cody created information. These were the blueprints of how to make the gun, and then he shared them on the internet, right? These are the facets of speech that the government sought to censor. Okay? The mere fact that information exists in zeros and ones rather than using brush strokes of a pen or the movement of a pencil should not matter for purposes of the First Amendment. We live, like Neo, in a world governed by data. And so much of our communications on a daily basis are electronic. And I think for the most part, the courts have been very receptive to this idea and have been willing to afford protection for information. If nothing else, Brown versus EMA was a case we studied before, where the court held that violent video games, which again are zeros and ones, right? That these violent video games are speech that wasn't even a controversial aspect. So the mere fact that Cody designs his CAD files, these 3D printed files on a computer, rather than at a drafting table, ought not to matter. So those are the reasons why I think the First Amendment provides a strong footing for our case. The second rationale, moving up to the next amendment, focuses on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment provides, as I'm sure everyone in Nebraska knows in kindergarten, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, what does this amendment mean? Well, people have various debates about this, but for now, let's focus on what the Supreme Court said. So in a 2008 decision involving this gentleman, a guy named Dick Heller, Heller challenged the District of Columbia's ban on the ownership of firearms. And in a case litigated by Alan Gura, who is our lead counsel in our case, the court agreed with Mr. Heller and said that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to keep and bear arms not connected with militia service, and that the city, the District of Columbia, could not ban the possession of firearms in the home. But that was only in a federal enclave, right? Then we have to deal with incorporation. 3 years later, we have the next case called McDonald v. City of Chicago. And this case challenged whether the Second Amendment is incorporated or extended to the states. In other words, can Rahm Emanuel deny people the right to bear arms? McDonald actually passed away in the last year. He was a great guy. He lived in a very rough neighborhood in Chicago, and the guy just wanted a gun to defend himself and his family. He was a civil rights icon in his own way, and he accomplished a lot in his life. The court held that no, the Chicago handgun ban cannot stand, and the Second Amendment extends to the states. And here's a great mashup of Otis McDonald and Dick Heller. I think this was taken after McDonald was decided in June of 2000, and was it 10 or 11? I've lost track of the years now, but 10 or 11. Okay, but wait a minute, Josh. All Heller said was that you have the right to keep a gun. It didn't say anything about making a gun or downloading a gun off the internet or printing a gun. Where are you getting all this from? So let's do a little bit of theorizing here, right? We have this right to keep and bear arms. And I argue, and you're free to disagree, that the right to keep and bear arms includes a right to both acquire and make arms. A right to acquire and make arms. Okay, why should the acquisition of guns be constitutionally protected? Well, think about this. Imagine after Heller, DC passed a law that said, okay, fine. If you already have a gun, you can keep it. You just can't buy any new guns. So if you have a gun, great, you keep it, but you can't buy any new guns. Would anyone think for a moment that law is constitutional? I don't think so. Being able to acquire a gun is a necessary condition of bearing arms. Okay? Being able to get a gun is a necessary condition of having a gun to bear. Now, I'm not saying, and please don't misunderstand me, that the sale of guns cannot be regulated. I do not make that position in the least. As Heller said, and I think it's reasonable, the right to bear arms can be regulated, but it cannot be prohibited. What does that mean? That some scrutiny, whatever that happens to be, applies to the acquisition of a gun. Indeed, Dick Heller was this case. He had a gun from the 70s before the DC handgun ban went into effect. He had to keep this gun in his home with a lock through it. If he removed that lock, he would have been guilty of a felony. Bizarrely, if someone had broken into his house and threatened his life, he had taken that lock off and shot the guy, he would have been prosecuted for illegal possession of a firearm in DC, which is stunning if you think about it. Self-defense, he would be prosecuted for illegal possession of a firearm. But after the case, he got a permit and was able to acquire a new gun for the District of Columbia. So I think we can at least agree at some basic level that a right to acquire arms in some fashion with some regulation must be allowed. Okay. The second component, and I think the stronger one is a right to make arms. So long before there was Cabela's or Walmart, if you wanted a gun, you made it. And going back to the time of the American Revolution, at the time of our founding, the patriots made their own muskets. They made their own arms. They made their own munitions. Has anyone ever seen the John Adams miniseries? It's a great miniseries. There's this beautiful scene that I really love where Abigail Adams is pouring molten balls for the soldiers to use. Making guns is in our DNA. As un-European as that may seem, this is going far back to our founding as a country. In many respects, the right to make arms is maybe even stronger, because even under federal law today, as those idiots with the pipe demonstrated, you can legally make your own gun for your own use, and the feds have no interest in it. That may change after this, but as law stands now, the right to make arms is fairly deeply entrenched and rooted in our nation's histories and traditions. So if you're with me so far, and maybe you're not, but if you're with me so far, the Second Amendment includes a right to make arms, a right to acquire arms. And this provides a framework to consider how 3D printed guns get scrutiny under both the Second Amendment as well as the First Amendment. But wait, I'm not done yet. Not just one amendment, not just two amendments, but a hybrid amendment. And this is a concept the Supreme Court has recognized in a few different cases. So think about it like this. The state passes a law saying it's illegal to say Merry Christmas. Can't say Merry Christmas. Is that a violation of free speech? Is it a violation of free exercise? Or is it a violation of both? And the courts, in a case called Employment Division versus Smith, which is not a popular case, but it's a case nonetheless, the court recognized these sorts of hybrid rights where one right enforces the other. When the government censors you from speaking about another right, they stop you from speaking about your religion. They stop you from speaking about politics. They stop you from speaking about reproductive choice, whatever it happens to be. Imagine the state passes a law saying public professors at public universities can't write about abortion. Okay, well, there's some 14th Amendment gist in there as well. It's not purely a free speech claim. So here, in this case, what is the government actually doing? They're stopping Cody from speaking about the Second Amendment. They're stopping Cody from speaking about how best to exercise the right to keep and bear arms. They're stopping him from sharing information about the best guns and how to make them safely, right? There is an interest in gun safety, of course, and making guns safely is significant. So here I think this violates not only the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, but both rights reinforcing themselves as a hybrid. So I want to turn next to the various legal regimes that exist now that govern 3D printed guns. And the first one is called the Undetectable Firearms Act. This act was enacted in 1988, and simply stated, it says if you have a gun, it must have a certain quantity of metal, enough to trigger an airport X-ray machine, enough to trigger a magnetometer. And it's not a very large quantity, it's some sort of small quantity. I should note that the Liberator, as designed, has a chunk of steel put into the barrel, which is sufficient to satisfy the Undetectable Firearms Act. So the Liberator is not a purely plastic firearm. Now, why did this law come about? Because of the Glock handgun. Okay, how many people have Glocks? Okay, good. So the Glock is a very popular handgun, and it was first made a sensation by John McClane, right? Bruce Willis in the Die Hard movies. And I can't do nearly enough justice to Bruce Willis's swag, but I will do my best. So there's one scene where he said, luggage, that punk pulled the Glock 7 on me. You know what that is? It's a porcelain gun made in Germany. It doesn't show up on your airport X-ray machines here, and it costs more than what you make in a month. Every single word of that sentence is a lie, okay? There's nothing true. There is no Glock 7. It's not made of porcelain, it's made of metal. It's not made in Germany, it's made in Austria. It will show up in an X-ray machine, and they're fairly affordable guns. So basically, everything he said was false. Everything. But it freaked people out saying, oh my God, we have to ban these. We have to ban these fake plastic guns. So this law was passed. Well, turns out this law actually proved useful, 30 years later when 3D guns came about. But at the time, this was a phoenix. There was no actual legitimate concern. So long as a gun has a certain quantity of metal in it, it can be banned, it can be regulated. Of course, if a criminal is intent on making a purely plastic gun, then no federal law will stop them. By the way, bullets set off metal detectors. So a gun without a bullet doesn't get you very far, right? They don't. I suppose, and I've actually researched this, a very low caliber bullet may not have enough ferrous content to set off a metal detector, but any 2 bullets probably will be enough. So this is mostly silly. I suppose you can smuggle a gun and get the bullets later, but you know, a gun without bullets, whatever, doesn't really do too much. But I suppose it's still a security threat. So what are some of the other methods of how 3D guns could be banned? Senator Schumer, who found a microphone, didn't take too long, had a press conference shortly after Cody's gun was released, saying we need to find a way to ban these guns. Legislation was proposed, but Congress doesn't pass laws anymore, so it went nowhere. We don't pass laws, right? So what are some of the ways that 3D guns can be regulated? So one proposal I've seen said we need to ban the materials, right? We need to regulate the sale of the plastic. That way people can't print 3D guns. Okay, this is insane because first of all, people make lots of things with 3D guns. With 3D printers. Banning plastic centers a wide range of communication. But more importantly, you can 3D print with metal. This is a 1911 handgun that's 3D printed. You can 3D print with steel. I've tried it. It's got good weight, good balance. It feels good. See here, it's a Solid Concept, Austin, Texas. That was made in a lab in Austin, not by Cody, by another company. So even if you ban plastic, you can still 3D print steel. This one took about 40 hours of manpower. I think it cost about $30,000 to make. So not a very good use of money. You can buy a gun far cheaper than that, but it is feasible. One of the other proposals I've seen, this was the most outlandish, was that we ban gunpowder. Because that way people don't have gunpowder, they can't shoot 3D guns. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Perhaps a more potent avenue to regulate 3D guns is actually through intellectual property law. And this actually, I think, is perhaps the greatest avenue for doing this. So there's something called DRM, Digital Rights Management. And if you remember back in the day with an iPod, if you bought a song off the iTunes store, you were not able to play it on any other device but an iPod. This is because the music you're buying is not actually yours. You're merely licensing it on the terms by which they sell it to you. And this means music is locked down. So in many respects, this DRM locked music, even Amazon Kindle. When you buy a book on your Amazon Kindle, believe it or not, you don't own the book. You're only having a license to it. And this is actually a true story. So if you purchase the book 1984, the George Orwell classic, right, on your Amazon Kindle, one day you wake up and the book is gone. 1984 is gone. Why? Amazon got into a dispute with the publisher of 1984, so they remotely deleted the books from Kindles. Can you imagine if all books 1984 remotely being deleted? It's almost too poetic to be ironic. But the next big frontier in digital rights management is 3D printing. Okay, why? Because if you can print something at home, you don't need to pay for it at the store. If you can print something at home, you do not need to pay for it at home. And I apologize for having to invoke a Kardashian-related relic in this discussion. But on a recent episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, which I do not watch, a Kanye West actually was shown some 3D printers that kids were using. And he said, and this is a verbatim quote, I can't make this up, "I'm afraid of 3D printing because the internet destroyed the music industry. Now, this is what we're afraid of right now, the textile industry." Okay, so he makes a line of clothes and shoes and various other products to waste your money on, right? Why would I spend $200 on a pair of Kanye West sneakers when I can print them myself for $5? Give me the raw materials, I can print it up, be done with it, in my perfect size, fit my foot. Awesome. So we have here, I propose, is a way that the Kanye West and the gun control advocates may come together in what we might call a bootlegger and Baptist coalition. And you know what a bootlegger and Baptist coalition is? Yes. Exactly right. So usually with any sort of social legislation, there are some people promoting the law for a sincere reason, and some people promoting it for a selfish reason. So think of prohibition, right? Who backed prohibition? Well, on the one hand, you have the Baptists, right? Alcohol is sinful, we need to ban alcohol. And they were acting out of, good interest, so to speak. And then you have prohibition. You have the bootleggers. Why do bootleggers love prohibition? because it jacks up the price for booze. It makes it more expensive and creates a monopoly rent for them to secure. So these are the two groups. And even today, do you have dry counties in Nebraska? No? Well, we have them in Texas, right? And I guarantee you, any dry county you see, on the county line, there's a liquor store right across the street, without fail. Why? Because they make all the money. So the reason why the dry county remains is the person in the next county over lobbies to keep the alcohol ban in place so that they get monopoly rents. It's a genius idea. You have to go across county lines to buy booze. Okay, so there's similar analysis with 3D printing. On the one hand, you have the Kanye Wests who say, you know what? We need to ban 3D printing. We need to regulate 3D printing because we don't want people jacking off our software and making our shoes. But who are the Baptists? Gun control advocates. Chuck Schumer, right? We need to stop 3D printing because it's going to kill people. So if you have, these good-hearted gun control advocates backed up by Kanye West, it creates a classic Baptist and bootlegger coalition. So what will this look like? Has anyone ever tried to make a copy of a $100 bill in a high-quality copy machine? None of you? You are better people than in Brooklyn. Brooklyn, they know exactly what we're talking about. If you go to your very high-quality color copy machine and you try to make a copy of a $100 bill, it won't work. It won't work. It'll print out an error message. Why? The Treasury Department has basically said to Hewlett-Packard and Xerox, if you send certain markers of a currency, don't print it. You didn't even know this, did you? Try it. It won't work, I promise. A similar device can be made for 3D printers. So rather than trying to photograph a $100 bill, you could try to print something that looks like a gun. And there could be a set of filters put in by by Treasury saying, or whatever agency saying, don't print this looks like a gun. This is how 3D printing is regulated, right? You use the gun as a Trojan horse, and then, oh, by the way, you can't print Yeezy sneakers. You can't print Reebok sneakers either. And I think this is actually a distinct possibility. In fact, there are already actually patents around of how to modify 3D printers so you can't create certain copyrighted objects. This is already in the works, and you'll probably see this within the next few years. I may be wrong, may be right, but this is definitely a distinct possibility. So they may actually use the gun issue as a foothold. In fact, as it stands now, the gun manufacturer, the 3D printer manufacturers won't even sell Cody printers anymore, but he gets them. It's not a problem. Not a problem. All right. So the final method, right? Oh, we have class soon? Oh, everyone goes. It's okay. You guys go. So the final method by which the government has sought to regulate 3D printed guns has been through what are called export control laws. Okay. There's something called ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulation. And these are a series of Cold War era regulations that were designed to prevent people from shipping guns overseas, right? It makes sense why we would want to ship a missile launcher to Syria, right? That seems like a good idea. But the problem is, in our case, the government has interpreted arms so broadly that arms includes not only physical arms, but also computer code. For example, cryptographic algorithms have been deemed information covered by ITAR. Okay, this is also something we argue that's unconstitutional. Treating information as a gun simply doesn't work. So finally, here is the letter. I'm almost done, I promise. Here is we'll have time for Q&A. Here is the letter that the State Department sent to Cody Wilson, my client. And they said, "Dear Mr. Wilson, you may not have known it, but putting files on the internet is against the law." Whoa, Cody had no idea. What do you mean it's against the law to put files on the internet? We found that you put the following 10 items on the internet. Now, think about this conception for a second. How do you put a pistol on the internet? Do you jam it into your USB drive, right? Do you jam into your router? Can you put a pistol into the internet? Of course not. But this is a fundamental disconnect with the government's position. They treat a file that can be used to make a pistol as if you're actually saying the pistol itself. This is poppycock. By the way, the Dirty Diane, the silencer right there, it's an oil can silencer named after Dianne Feinstein. So the key part, though, the key element of this is this sentence I've underlined in red. Until the government determines if your information is okay, all data should be removed from public access immediately. All data must be removed from public access immediately. This is a prior restraint of speech where the government is censoring information based on its content without regard to whether it actually has been used in any sort of foreign terrorism. This is unconstitutional. This is void on many fronts for the reasons I've articulated today. So to give you an update on our case, we actually moved for a preliminary injunction in federal district court. That was denied. So we're currently on appeal to the Fifth Circuit. Our opening brief is due in middle of December. And we may have argument at some point in the spring, and hopefully we'll get the judgment of the lower court reversed. So I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your attention, and I welcome any questions that you may have. So thank you so much. Yes, sir.
I enjoyed your presentation, Montrose, and I agree with a lot of what you said. I had a question, though, about both the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. On the First Amendment, let's hypothesize a small change in the facts so that instead of a prior restraint, the government were to criminalize it after the fact. So that takes out the Pentagon Papers. Under holding the Humanitarian Law Project, the government gets a lot of deference for the type of national security concern. So the First Amendment question is, if you remove the prior restraint, and I actually think Humanitarian Law Project was wrongly decided.
Agreed.
But to the extent that why is if you remove prior restraint problems, the First Amendment question, why isn't that case a serious problem in your First Amendment theory? And then on the Second Amendment, one thing you didn't talk about is it seems that the government has an interest in gun seizing principle. So it could, for instance, or the government could say something like this: when a person buys a gun in the store, it has a serial number, and there's ballistics information, that makes it possible to trace, so if someone commits a crime. Whereas with 3D guns, the government can't trace it, and that creates a strong enough government interest in prohibiting 3D guns, so as that ban would comply with the Second Amendment, even though obviously under the Second Amendment you can't prohibit people from buying guns.
Okay, thank you, Eric, Mr. Berger. So the first question that he asked is actually a good one, right? What if this wasn't a prior?
The second one.
Was it? Oh, I'll get to that in a second. So the first question is, what if this wasn't a prior restraint, right? What if they were merely punishing Cody for actually printing these after the fact, okay? That would be a different case, but the issue there is there's no statute in the books that does this.
Sure.
Right, so Congress has to actually enact a statute. I think Congress probably could enact a possession statute saying that you need to have a serial, presumably Congress could say that all guns have serial numbers. I think that may actually be valid in the Second Amendment. That actually answers your second question as well. So if Congress enacted that statute, that's one. But I don't think Congress could enact a statute merely putting it on the internet. I think they could probably regulate the act of possession of guns with a serial number, but any act of putting it on the internet, I don't think that can be punished as an act of speech. Yeah. Yes.
Two questions, kind of different. First, with respect to the manufacturing issue, is there a difference between me printing out a replica of a Colt Python, the Colt might have a design on that, versus simply banning a gun of the kind that this gun might have made? I mean, as far as I know, it's something you just, banning a gun itself is something with triggered shoots. Isn't there a difference in that? I mean, I can see where they could, a company could enforce intellectual property rights on Colt 911 or a gun was already designed, but how are we going to frame it if it's not going to ban just the sheer concept of the gun? I mean, that's like banning information for sure. I don't know if anybody actually has rights on a particular item.
Right, so let me answer this one first. So there are no IP issues here. Cody designed this gun open source, which means it's no patent. So if he had just printed a Glock 19, Glock would have sued him to stop. We deliberately picked a what constitutes a gun. And the government's defined this as a munition, something that can basically blow up. It's a very broad definition. It's not quite a shirt, but it definitely includes various things that can fire projectile. Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What happened in the district court that made you lose?
Well, with respect to the court, I disagree with the opinion. The court seemed to embrace the government's argument that the firearm was effectively a function. Sorry, the file was a functional equivalent of the firearm. The court seemed to embrace that argument. With respect to the court, I do not agree, and I think will be vindicated in appeal, especially in light of the case of Reed v. Town of Gilbert. Reed was decided while the case was being briefed. So we mentioned in one of our briefs, the court acknowledged it, but didn't really grapple with the consequences. And they discussed these secondary effects of speech. I don't think that's good law anymore. Or if it is, it's on a very weak footing after Reed.
Are there any other cases? I mean, I know that old progressive case with the atomic bomb instructions, that's like 1979. Are there any other prior restraint cases?
There are very few. So there was actually a case, I showed you an image involving cryptography a couple slides ago, where the court tried to say, I'm sorry, the federal government tried to say that you could not export a book about cryptography to the United Kingdom. This case went up and down the courts in a very complicated posture. The district court held that this was unconstitutional to the First Amendment, but then the case got vacated after en banc and they transferred to another agency, and then the government just said, we're not going to prosecute you. So basically the case went away. This was a case called Bernstein. So there are actually precedents for the court trying to enforce this, but they're very spotty. So this is actually one of the few cases where, look, we have this letter, right? This letter gives us standing. This letter exists, right? And we filed within 2 years, so we have standing. They can't back off from this letter. They can't say, oh, we're not going to prosecute you. There's a credible threat of prosecution from this letter, and we're going to litigate this case all the way. I mean, Alan Gurr is our lead counsel. I'm on it. Another guy named Matt Goldstein. We're staffed. We're staffed to go all the way in this one, so we're very excited. Other questions? Yes.
It probably only applies to the original gun design you showed here, which looks like a toy, quite frankly. Has the government ever tried to make an argument that if you're a police officer or whatever, and someone produces this, that it's going to be a problem to them in the field? I mean, it's going to pose a substantial risk of increasing police shootings.
So
you got a toy, you got to have a red plastic knob on it. How are we supposed to differentiate?
Right. So DHS has basically said you can't stop 3D printed guns. They can't. If someone wants to make a plastic gun, it won't be discerned in a metal detector. If you put through an X-ray, know the body scanners at the airport that spin around, it'll pick up on that. But these sorts of guns are very hard to stop. Anything else? Well, I thank you all so much for your time. Have a wonderful day, and I appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much.